The Cold War, Operation Gladio, and Terrorism in Western Europe, Part 2. A scandal shocks Western Europe. Journalists of foreign newspapers sat around in the press club in Rome in summer 1990 and lamented that their paper had absolutely no nerve for the delicate Gladio story and its international dimension. For the revelations of Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti on August 3rd to the Italian senators concerning the existence of a secret NATO-linked stay-behind army across Western Europe had come at a particularly disturbing moment. Andreotti had made his far-reaching revelation just a day after, on August 2nd, 1990, when Iraq's dictator, Saddam Hussein, had invaded and occupied Kuwait. Newspaper editors and military advisors in Paris, London and Washington feared that the Gladio story might seriously damage the image of numerous Western democracies and, above all, destabilise the preparations for the Second Gulf War. For on August 2nd in New York, the United States, Great Britain and France, alarmed by the invasion of Kuwait, had, with the consent of China and Russia in the United Nations Security Council, passed UN Security Council Resolution 660, ordering that Iraq withdraw immediately and unconditionally all its forces to the positions in which they were located on the 1st of August 1990. Of course, we know the Iraq War was started by the United States. They urged Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait and then basically armed both sides. Western and world media thereafter focused on the Gulf story and reported how the United States under President George Bush Sr., in the world's largest military operation since the Second World War, led a large coalition of countries including Germany, France, Great Britain, Belgium, Italy and the Netherlands, who, in Operation Desert Storm in January and February 1991, expelled Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. This, quite by coincidence, the global media networks fed the world two bizarre stories that at the same time, a clean war in the Gulf and the Gladio scandal in Europe that did not happen. Following the revelations of Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti, the scandal transgressed the Italian border when on October 30th, former Socialist Prime Minister of Greece, Andreas Papandreou, confirmed to the Greek daily Tene that in 1984, he as well had discovered a secret NATO structure in Greece, very similar to the Italian Gladio, which he had ordered to dissolve. Passionate calls for a parliamentary investigation of the secret army and its suspected involvement in the right-wing military coup of 1967 followed in Greece, but were defeated by the acting Conservative government. Defence Minister Varvitsiotis explained that a former Greek military attaché in Washington who had worked in NATO would look at the accusations while he promised the government must not fear anything. From Greece, the scandal swooped over to Germany, where on November 5th, Green parliamentarian Manfred Such, having learned of the scandal from the German daily TAZ, formally requested the German government of Helmut Kohl to comment on the suspected existence of Gladio structures in Germany, while the German Defense Ministry contemplated a strategy how the request should be handled, about how the private television channel RTL shocked the German public by revealing in a special Gladio report that former members of Hitler's Special Forces SS had been part of Germany's Gladio network, while also in numerous other countries right-wing extremists had been recruited into the anti-communist secret army. Now, a lot of the liberal West German liars talk about Germany denazifying. It didn't denazify at all. Heads of the Nazi state went into NATO, they went into the European Union. Operation Paperclip scooped up loads of scientists and took them over to the United States and treated them like royalty. It's not really much of a surprise that ex-Hitlerites are joining this Gladio army. Tensions heightened even more when German government spokesman Hans Klein, in a confused manner thereafter, publicly explained that the German Gladio was not, as had been claimed, a secret commando troop or a guerrilla unit, adding that he could not discuss details for reasons of strict secrecy. Klein's statements caused an outcry among opposition Social Democrats and Green politicians who sensed the platform for the upcoming national elections. Member of Parliament Hermann Scheer, defence expert of the German Socialist Party, the SPD, criticised that this mysterious right-wing network might well be some sort of Ku Klux Klan designed more for clandestine operations against the population and the opposition than for an unlikely Soviet invasion, which is the point I've been making all the way through this book. It's got nothing to do Operation Gladio had nothing to do with Soviet invasion. That was just a pretext for setting up these secret armies to ensure that Europe remained a right-wing vassal state of the United States. She insisted that in order to avoid that a cover-up destroys the traces, an investigation of Gladio had to be carried out as soon as possible. The affair is a case for the National Public Prosecutor, the General Bundesrat. Scheer explained, because the existence of an armed military secret organisation outside all governmental or parliamentary control is incompatible with the constitutional legality and therefore must be prosecuted according to criminal law. I don't think any of those prosecutions ever came through. It might be in their constitution, but the NATO runs European countries. NATO comes in, they take over all the structures of society. That's just how it works. Socialist parliamentarian Wilfried Penner, a member of the Parliamentary Commission, PKK, of the German Secret Police, emphasised that he had never heard of the secret NATO network and the mafiotic entanglements, stressing that this mess must be dealt with publicly in front of all eyes. Also, Burkhard Hirsch, the government controller of the Secret Service and PKK member, was extremely worried, because if something remains secret so long, then my life experience tells me that there must be something rotten about the affair. Yet the call for a full-fledged investigation suddenly evaporated amongst the German socialists when the acting government revealed that also socialist ministers, during their time in office, had covered up the secret, whereupon, despite the protests of the German Green Party, the affair was dealt with silently behind closed doors. And we see how the so-called socialists work in Western societies. They're just an appendage of the state. All these people, they're the left pillar of fascism that holds up. Social Democrats have always acted in this way. In Belgium, in the evening of November 7th, Socialist Defence Minister Guy Cohen addressed the startled public when he confirmed that a secret NATO-linked army had also existed in Belgium, with an implicit reference to the Brabant massacres in the 1980s, during which people were gunned down by mysterious men in black in several supermarkets. The Defence Minister added, "Furthermore, I want to know whether there exists a link between the activities of this secret network and the wave of crime and terror within which our country suffered from during the past years." Greatly disturbed, Belgian Prime Minister Wilfried Martens confronted the flashlights of the press, declaring, "I have been Prime Minister for 11 years now, but I have been completely unaware that such a secret network existed in our country." The journalist noticed that the Prime Minister, so self-confident in other circumstances, was far from being relaxed, whereupon the Belgian Parliament decided to form a special committee to investigate the Belgian stay behind, and after having closed down the network a year later, presented a valuable 250 pages strong public report. Most sensitively, the Belgian parliamentarians discovered that the secret NATO army was still active. They found that a secret meeting of generals directing the secret stay-behind armies in the numerous countries in Western Europe had been held in the secret NATO-linked Gladio headquarters, ACC, as recently as October 23rd and 24th, 1990. The meeting of the ACC had taken place in Brussels under the chairmanship of General Raymond von Kolster, Chief of the Belgian Military Secret Service, SGR, the Service General de Renseignement. I'm butchering that pronunciation. The general was furious when journalists followed the lead, and his phone kept ringing all the time. He first lied to the press when, on November 9th, he flatly denied having chaired the international ACC meeting, claiming that Gladio was a purely Italian affair. Later, he admitted that indeed a secret network had been erected in Belgium after the Second World War to collect information in case of a Soviet invasion. While he angrily insisted that there was no direct link with NATO, he refused to reveal further details, and at the same time emphasised, "We have nothing to hide." In France, the government of Socialist President Francois Mitterrand attempted to avoid another further embarrassment when, on November 9th, a low-key official claimed that in France a secret army had long been dissolved. In addition, General Constantin Melnik, chief of the French Secret Services from 1959 to 1962, in the leading French daily spread the rumour that the French Gladio had probably already been dissolved after Stalin's death in 1953, and certainly did not exist anymore at the time when de Gaulle was president of France, thus after 1958. The French press sided with the government, who was preparing for the war in the Gulf, and refrained from asking sensitive questions, and hence an affair which made front-page headlines in the other daily European newspapers only got a small note at the bottom of the page in Paris. Italian Prime Minister Andreotti mercilessly shattered the French cover-up when on November 10th, 1990, he declared with some amusement that France also had taken part in the very recent meeting of the Gladio directing body ACC in Belgium on October 23rd, 1990. Somewhat embarrassed, French Defense Minister Jean-Pierre Chevènement thereafter attempted to limit the damage by claiming that the French secret army had been completely passive. As far as I am aware, it never had more than a sleeper's role and a role of liaison. Asked by the radio journalist whether France would now face similar political turmoil as Italy and Belgium, after speculations about domestic and terroristic activities of the secret Gladio army, the defense minister calmly replied, "I don't think so." Journalists noted that the government was making every effort to prevent that the Gladio revelations were recognised as a domestic monstrosity. In Great Britain, spokespersons of the Defence Department declared day after day to the inquisitive British press, "I'm afraid we wouldn't discuss security matters, and it is a security matter. We are not speaking about it, and we cannot be drawn into discussing security matters." As the press continues to raise the Gladio topic day after day, British Defence Secretary Tom King tried to handle the thoroughly distressing affair with a casual joke. "I am not sure what particular hot potato you're chasing after. It sounds wonderfully exciting, but I'm afraid I'm quite ignorant about it. I'm better informed about the Gulf." In the context of the preparations for Operation Desert Storm and the war against Iraq, the British Parliament did not press for a parliamentary investigation or an open parliamentary debate, but backed the government of Prime Minister John Major. And still in summer 1992, there was no official British explanation on Gladio, leaving journalists as Hugh O'Shaughnessy to lament that the silence in Whitehall and the almost total lack of curiosity among MPs about an affair in Britain which was so centrally involved are remarkable. Well, that's because the British state is set up completely for these transnational corporations. The people that manage the British state don't really care about the people. They manage it to profit off it, make money off people, sell them out to the highest bidder on the international market. And as we see here, Western so-called democracies seem to operate on a way of just crisis after crisis after crisis. So they create a new Gulf War, and then they use this to cover up Gladio, because all the attention is on the new Gulf War going on. In the Netherlands, Prime Minister Ruud Lubbers, in office since 1982, decided to deal with the sensitive topic by writing a letter to Parliament on November 13th in which he confirmed the existence of a secret army. Also in the Netherlands, stressing that there was never any NATO supervision over this organisation. Thereafter, Lubbers and Dutch Defence Minister Ries ter Beek briefed Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee behind closed doors on the sensitive details of the Dutch Gladio. Successive prime ministers and defence ministers have always preferred not to inform other members of their cabinets or Parliament. Lubbers declared to Parliament, adding that he was proud that some 30 ministers had kept the secret, while parliamentarians criticised the inherent danger of a secret army unknown to Parliament or the population at large. It was decided not to carry out a parliamentary investigation of the secret network, nor to present a public network. I don't particularly worry that there was, and perhaps still is, such a thing. Hans Jigstall of the opposition Liberals said, "What I do have problems with is that until last night, Parliament was never told." In neighbouring Luxembourg, Prime Minister Jacques Santer on November 14th, 1990, took a stand in front of the Parliament and confirmed that a secret army linked to NATO had also existed in Luxembourg. The only activities of these persons, and this is the case for the entire time period in which this network has existed, have been limited to the training and preparation of their missions, including the training of how to behave individually in a hostile environment and how to coordinate efforts with allied countries, Santer insisted. The request of parliamentarian Jean Hus of the Luxembourg Green Alternative Party, which asked first of all for an open debate in Parliament on the issue, and in the second place for the establishment of a parliamentary commission of inquiry into the topic, was declined in a majority decision, when the international press related that in Portugal, a Lisbon radio station has reported that sales of the network associated with Operation Gladio were active during the 1950s to defend the rightist dictatorship of Dr. Salazar. The government in power reacted with a flat refusal. Portuguese Defence Minister Fernando Nogueira on November 16th, 1990, declared that he had no knowledge of the existence of any kind of Gladio branch in Portugal, and claimed that there existed neither in his defence ministry nor the general staff of the Portuguese armed forces any information whatsoever concerning the existence or activity of any Gladio structure in Portugal. A retired general disagreed with the claim of the government that, under the condition of being allowed to remain anonymous, confirmed to the press that a secret parallel army also existed in Portugal, dependent on the Defence Ministry, the Interior Ministry, and the Ministry for Colonial Affairs. In neighbouring Spain, which, similar to Portugal during most of the Cold War, had been a right-wing dictatorship which fought the political opposition with terror and torture, Alberto Olliar, Defence Minister in the early 1980s, considered it to be childish to ask whether also under dictator Franco a secret right-wing army had existed in the country, because here Gladio was the government. In Denmark, Defence Minister Knud Enggaard, due to public pressure, was forced to take a stand in front of the Danish Parliament, Folketing, where on November 21st he rejected the claim that any kind of NATO-supported CIA organisation had been erected in Denmark. Further pieces of information on a secret service operation in case of an occupation is classified material, even highly classified material, the Defence Minister emphasised, and I am therefore prohibited from giving any further information in the Danish Parliament. Member of Parliament Pelle Vogt, who had raised the Gladio question in Parliament, noticed that the Defence Minister's answer was contradictory and an indirect confirmation of the fact that Denmark too had its secret network. Thereafter, a discussion of the secret army took place behind closed doors in the committee of the Danish Parliament concerned the supervision of the Secret Service. And you see why Germany has committed suicide, just allowed its Nord Stream 2 pipeline to be blown up by the United States and just done nothing about it, because Gladio runs all these countries. That's the truth of it. When in Norway, the press started to confront the government with Gladio questions, it was provided with what arguably was the shortest comment on the continent of a government concerning the secret army. What Hansen said then still applies, Defence Ministry spokesman Erik Senstad explained in a reference to 1978, when after the discovery the Norwegian stay-behind Defence Minister Rolf Hansen had admitted the existence of a secret army to the Norwegian Parliament. Rear Admiral Jan Ingebrigtsen, who in 1985 had stepped down as head of the Norwegian Supreme Defence Command Intelligence Service, amidst public criticism, insisted that it was only logical that the armies had to remain secret. There's nothing suspicious about it, but these are units that would stay behind in occupied territory, and is therefore necessary that they be kept top secrets. In Turkey, the ruling elite took a stand on Gladio issue on December 3rd, when General Doğan Beyazıt, President of the Operations Department of the Turkish military, and General Kemal Yilmaz, Chief of the Turkish Special Forces, confirmed to the press the existence of a secret army in Turkey directed by the Special Warfare Department with the task to organise resistance in the case of communist occupation. While the general stressed that the members of the Turkish Gladio were all good patriots, the press and former Prime Minister Bülent Ecevit stressed that this secret army called counter-guerrilla had been repeatedly involved in torture, massacres and assassination operations, as well as the coup d'etats the country had suffered from, and was presently employed to fight the Kurdish minority in the country. Thereafter, the ruling military refused to answer questions from Parliament and civil ministers, and Turkish Defence Minister Giray warned that Ecevit had better keep his fucking mouth shut. As the counter-guerrilla continued its operations, even the US State Department, in its 1995 Human Rights Report, noticed that in Turkey, prominent credible human rights organisations, Kurdish leaders and local Kurd asserted that the government acquiesces in or even carries out the murder of civilians. The report of the State Department noted that the human rights group reported the widespread and credible belief that a counter-guerrilla group associated with the security forces had carried out at least some mystery killings. In the United States, journalist Lucy Commissar tried to gain more information but found that her government was hardly different from the Turkish generals when it came to military secrets. As for Washington's role, the Pentagon would not tell me whether it was still providing funds or further aid or other aid to the Special Warfare Department. In fact, it wouldn't answer any questions about it. Commissar was repeatedly turned away. I was told by officials variously that they knew nothing about it, that it happened too long ago for there to be any records available, or that what I described was a CIA operation for which they could provide no information. One Pentagon historian said, "Oh, you mean the Stay Behind organization? That's classified." The issue of the counter-guerrilla, however, did not go away. On November 3rd, 1996, a speeding black Mercedes hit a tractor and crashed on a remote highway near the Turkish village of Susalak, some 100 miles south of Istanbul. A prominent member of the Turkish counter-guerrilla, a top police official and a member of parliament were killed in the crash. To many, it was the physical proof of how closely the entire government was involved in the dirty war of the counter-guerrilla, and thousands protested against the Susalak state and demanded that the country be cleansed from the gangs. In January 1998, Prime Minister Mesut Yilmaz had to inform millions of television viewers the results of a 7-month-long parliamentary investigation into the Susalak scandal. It is the anatomy of a disgraceful mess. He began his statement and thereafter admitted that an execution squad was formed within the state, while all parts of the state were aware of what was going on. Given the far-reaching revelations across Western Europe, the Gladio scandal was also discussed by the Parliament of the European Union on November 22nd, 1990. At the time, the EU numbered 12 countries, all of whom were affected by the scandal. The 12 had greatly increased cooperation among each other and were about to establish the common European market without borders for persons, goods, services, and capital, while security policy and defence matters in the new organisation still rested within the sovereign control of each EU member state. It's important to point out here that the European Union was created by the CIA. All the top heads of the CIA after World War II wanted to draw Europe together under American rule, and the European Union was created by Alan Dulles and a bunch of other CIA spooks. Maybe I'll do a video on that at one point. But the European Union was only ever created as like an American appendage to control the European continent. And now that America is declining, it's cannibalizing the European Union. So previously they provided the Marshall Plan to build up Europe as to be a successful opposition to Soviet communism, and now they're deindustrializing it. So they're just destroying all industry in Europe. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, there is one fundamental moral and political necessity in regard to the new Europe, that we are progressively building. Italian parliamentarian Falchi wisely opened the debate on the day. This Europe will have no future if it is not founded on truth, on the full transparency of its institutions in regard to the dark plots against democracy that have turned upside down the history, even in recent times, of many European states. Falchi insisted that there will be no future, ladies and gentlemen, if we do not remove the idea of having lived in a kind of double state, one open and democratic, the other clandestine and reactionary. That is why we want to know what and how many Gladio networks there have been in recent years in the member states of the European community. French parliamentarian Jury shared these concerns, and among the United European delegates declared, "What worried us is this Gladio affair was that these networks were able to exist out of sight and beyond control of the democratic political authorities. That, I think, is the fundamental issue which remains." Jury concluded that the history of the Gladio armies had to be investigated. For our part, we believe that the light has to be shed on this whole affair so that we can recognise all of its implications and stop the problem lingering on or occurring with other organisations, or prevent other temptations from arising. Also, the role of NATO, according to Jury, had to be investigated, although as for the responsibility of NATO and shape, I don't think one should talk about a conspiracy, Jury said, but I think we must keep up this spirit of inquiry and this concern for everything to be brought out into the open. We know very well that some people in Gladio also sit on NATO committees, and hence, he concluded, I feel that it is part of our democratic duty to be able to shed proper light on all these kinds of problems. Yeah, you can hear the liberal wishful thinking coming out of all these politicians. Mr. President, the Gladio system has operated for 4 decades under various names. Greek parliamentarian Ephremidis addressed the EU. It is operated clandestinely, and we are entitled to attribute to it all the destabilization, all the provocation, and all the terrorism that have occurred in our countries over these 4 decades. And to say that actively or passively, it must have had an involvement. Ephremidis sharply criticised the entire stay-behind network. The fact that it was set up by the CIA and NATO, which purporting to defend democracy, was actually undermining it and using it for their own nefarious purposes. With an implicit reference to the involvement of the Greek Gladio in the 1967 coup d'etat, he criticised that the democracy we are supposed to have been enjoying has been, and still is, nothing but a front, and encouraged the EU Parliament to investigate the matter further. The fine details must be uncovered, and we ourselves must establish a special committee of inquiry to hold hearings and to blow the whole thing wide open, so that all the necessary steps can be taken to rid our countries of such clandestine operations. I don't think any of those structures have been removed. They're all still there, 100%. French parliamentarian Daytona shared a different perspective when he declared, Mr. President, it was perfectly legitimate at the end of the Second World War for the majority of our states to set up services whose purpose was to prepare underground resistance networks that could be activated in the event of our countries being occupied by the forces of the Warsaw Pact. Hence, the French parliamentarian highlighted, we must therefore pay tribute to all those who, while the Cold War lasted, worked in those networks. To Daytona, it was clear that the clandestine armies had to remain secret. For these networks to remain effective, it was obviously necessary for them to be kept secret, while at the same time he wanted to have clarity as to alleged links to terrorist activities. Having said that, if there are serious indications or suspicions to the effect that some or all of those networks have operated in an illegal or abnormal way in certain countries, it is in everyone's interest for matters to be brought into the open and for the guilty to be punished. Dutch MP Van der Meulenbroek captured the feeling of many Europeans well when he summarised that this affair leaves a bad taste in the mouth since it has been going on for as long as the European community has been in existence, and we claim to be creating a new form of democracy. Van der Meulenbroek stressed that it was above all the secrecy of the entire affair that greatly worried him as a parliamentarian, for the budgets of these secret organisations were also kept secret. They were not discussed in any parliament, and we wish to express our concern at the fact that it now emerges that there are centres for taking decisions and carrying them out which are not subject to any form of democratic control. The Dutch parliamentarian concluded that I should like to protest most strongly against the fact that the American military, whether through SHAPE, NATO or the CIA, think they can interfere in what is our democratic right, while he acknowledged that the European Parliament itself did not have the competence to deal with the affair. I realise that we in the European Parliament have no competence regarding peace and security matters, he explained, and hence the compromise resolution asks for parliamentary committees of inquiry to be set up in each of the 12 member states so that we do get total clarification. Following the debate, the Parliament of the EU decided to pass a resolution on the Gladio affair in which the parliamentarians critically reflected upon the Gladio phenomenon, and in 7 points formulated as a preamble to the resolution, attempted to summarise the main features of the Gladio phenomenon. Having regard to the revelation by several European governments of the existence of 40 years of a clandestine parallel intelligence and armed operations organisation in several member states of the community. 2. Whereas for over 40 years this organisation has escaped all democratic controls and has been run by the secret services of the states concerned in collaboration with NATO. 3. Fearing the danger that such clandestine networks may have interfered illegally in the internal political affairs of member states or may still do so. It's a pretty key point, may still do so. 4. Whereas in certain member states, military secret services or uncontrolled branches thereof were involved in serious cases of terrorism and crime as evidenced by various judicial inquiries. Whereas these organizations are operated and continue to operate completely outside the law, since they are not subject to any parliamentary control, and frequently those holding the highest government and constitutional posts are kept in the dark as to these matters. 6. Whereas the various Gladio organizations have at their disposal independent arsenals and military resources which give them an unknown strike potential, thereby jeopardizing the democratic structures of the countries in which they are operating or have been operating. And 7. Greatly concerned at the existence of decision-making and operational bodies which are not subject to any form of democratic control and are of a completely clandestine nature, at time when greater community cooperation in the field of security is a constant subject of discussion. Thereafter, as a first point of criticism following the preamble, the resolution of the EU Parliament condemns the clandestine creation of manipulative and operational networks and calls for a full investigation into the nature, structure, aims, and all other aspects of these clandestine organizations or any splinter groups. They're used for illegal interference in the internal political affairs of the countries concerned. The problem with terrorism in Europe and the possible collusion of the secret services of member states or third countries. As a second point, the EU protests vigorously at the assumption by certain US military personnel at SHAPE and in NATO of the right to encourage the establishment in Europe of a clandestine intelligence and operation network. As a third point, the resolution calls on the governments of the member states to dismantle all clandestine military and parliamentary networks. As a fourth point, the EU calls on the judiciaries of the countries in which the presence of such military organizations has been ascertained to elucidate fully their composition and modus operandi and to clarify any action they may have taken to destabilize the democratic structures of the member states. Furthermore, as a fifth point, the EU requests all the member states to take the necessary measures, if necessary by establishing parliamentary committees of inquiry, to draw up a complete list of organizations active in this field, and at the same time to monitor their links with the respective state intelligence services and their links, if any, with the terrorist action groups and or other illegal practices. As a sixth point, the EU Parliament addresses the EU Council of Ministers, above all in its reunion as defence ministers, and calls on the Council of Ministers to provide full information on the activities of these secret intelligence and operational services. As a seventh point, the resolution calls on its competent committee to consider holding a hearing in order to clarify the role and impact of the Gladio organisation and any similar bodies. Last but not least, in its final point, the resolution explicitly addresses both NATO and the United States. As the EU Parliament instructs its President to forward this resolution to the Commission, the Council, the Secretary General of NATO, the governments of the Member States and the United States government, the dog barked loudly, but it did not bite. Of the 8 actions requested by the EU Parliament, not one was carried out satisfactorily. Only Belgium, Italy and Switzerland investigated their secret armies with a parliamentary commission, producing a lengthy and detailed public report, and although the resolution was forwarded to the respective branches of the EU, NATO and the United States, NATO Secretary General Manfred Werner and senior US President George Bush neither supported a detailed investigation nor offered a public explanation. There you go, end of part 3. Catch you next time, guys.